50 yards.
Okay, can you raise the port light?
In between, like the bigger one off the port bow and the smaller one off the starboard bow, that's where I'm going to try to go. Very good.
Good morning, Margaret Brook. Opso here with a quick update. Last night we hit another amazing milestone of passing the Antarctic Circle.
Welcome to CBC in Antarctica. I'm Susan Ormiston, CBC's international climate correspondent. This continent is icy and unforgiving, but it's changing. We've been 4 weeks sailing with HMCS Margaret Brook and Canadian scientists on a first ever Canadian expedition to Antarctica. We've had exclusive access on board the Navy ship, sailed across the Drake Passage, and over thousands of kilometers with some harrowing navigation to witness the best of polar science and polar diplomacy in action, even with Antarctica's real ambassadors. Later, we'll show you a journey through ice you won't want to miss. But first, who governs this place? Antarctica is a wholly unique place politically. No one owns the continent. It's not divided up between nations. It's governed by an international treaty. But with the world increasingly divisive, can Antarctica stay neutral and unclaimed?
Antarctica is now on the horizon. For many, this will be a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Antarctica is like nowhere on Earth. At the southern end of the world, a land of extreme cold and ice. Countries have tried to lay claim, but no one owns it. Antarctic claims were frozen in time 65 years ago, during the height of the Cold War.
12 nations began work today on a treaty to reserve the South Polar continent for peaceful purposes.
The Antarctic Treaty, signed by 12 countries initially, became the governing rules of the territory and is to this day.
The Antarctic Treaty, first and foremost, is an arms control treaty. It's incredibly important in the sense that it declared the Antarctic continent and surrounding ocean a nuclear weapons-free zone.
Back in 1959, the area around the South Pole, an area 1.5 times the US, was designated special. It meant that anything that happened would be governed by this Treaty of Nations, and decisions had to be made by consensus. It's mainly worked, but there are tensions. Like the ice breaking up in Antarctica, the treaty is showing cracks.
The Antarctic Treaty is under considerable stress and strain, probably entering the worst period it's ever experienced.
Rising geopolitical conflicts and the warming effects of climate change on the remote continent are testing the treaty.
There's geopolitical desire to have influence on this huge part of the planet. That's done not through projection of military power, but through establishing scientific outposts.
The treaty, now signed by 58 countries, including Canada, preserves this place for science and peace. That's it. Military activity outside of science is prohibited, and a later protocol banned mining exploration. Countries demonstrate their foothold here in Antarctica the only way they can, with research stations like Brazil's. There are about 80 stations and camps operated by 40 countries. The US has 3 year-round, one the biggest by far, and one right at the South Pole. Russia operates 5 permanent stations, one in Maxwell Bay. On the opposite side of the bay, the Great Wall, operated by China. It recently built a 3rd permanent station, Quinling, and operates 2 others in the Antarctic summer.
It is preparing itself, like Russia, to potentially claim, if it had to or thought it was advantageous to, make such a claim.
Officially, all the research stations are doing critical science work, But at the strategic southern pole, is science the only objective for some countries?
There are concerns about whether technologies are being used that are brought for science or also used for some other, say, military purposes. There's also a question about whether demilitarization will hold for the future. There are questions about whether the mining ban, will hold.
Last year, a Russian research ship reported vast reserves of oil, over 500 billion barrels, after surveying parts of the Antarctic Sea, raising questions about its future loyalty to the mining ban. Other flashpoints are straining Antarctic politics. The commercial fishery for krill is expanding with huge new ships. Quotas are being challenged. China and Russia recently vetoed a new marine protected area.
What's happening now is that as the relationship with Russia has deteriorated so badly, China becoming a more assertive polar actor, it's becoming really hard to find consensus.
Canada signed on to the Antarctic Treaty in 1988, but doesn't have a permanent footprint. It does have ambitions to be a stronger strategic player. In February, a Navy ship, the HMCS Margaret Brooke, hosted a team of Canadian scientists and waved the flag at the Chilean Antarctic Institute, setting in motion closer collaboration between polar nations.
Up until maybe just a few years ago, we talked about the Arctic as a place of relative stability, and the Antarctic Treaty as a framework for peace and stability in the Antarctic regions. And now both of those assumptions are being challenged.
Canada doesn't operate its own research station, but has long experience with Arctic operations.
Very important to have knowledge of both poles. There's a lot of things happening right now, and so it's very good that we are present here in the Southern Hemisphere.
From Punta Arenas, the Navy embarked on a 4-week all-Canadian expedition to Antarctica, sailing across the Antarctic Circle and as far as Rothera Point on the peninsula.
Steer 332. Starboard 5.
At its first stop, a delegation from the Navy and the science team went ashore in Admiralty Bay. The landing party was welcomed by Antarctica's infamous ambassadors before Commander Terry Scher and Chief Scientist Thomas James trekked up the slope to visit one of the newest research facilities, Brazil's Foz Station on King George Island.
Hi, so I'm Terry Scher, so I'm the captain of the Margaret Brooke that you've seen operate here the last 24 hours.
We have 24 projects in total.
After a fire destroyed Foz Station in 2012, Brazil designed a new, modern, year-round facility for 75 scientists working in state-of-the-art labs.
When you came to Antarctica and you see how beautiful is this part of the world, the feeling is that, we need to do something to preserve this part. Our world is praised nowadays, okay? And I think that the Antarctic Treaty is a good example that it can work.
Canada is seen as a significant contributor to Antarctic science, but it wants a bigger voice in the treaty to elevate its status to voting member, a so-called consultative party.
The last 3 or 4 years, Canada's claim to be a consultative party has been blocked first and foremost by Russia. And the reason is Russia wants its ally, Belarus, to be made a consultative party alongside Canada.
Without Belarus, there's been no consensus.
Canada publishes more scientific work on the Antarctic than about 2/3 of the consultative parties. So, to my mind, bluntly put, it's an absolute travesty of justice that Canada is not a consultative party.
Antarctica is still remote, but increasingly not insulated from disputes outside the continent. Under Donald Trump, the U.S. plans cuts to its Antarctic budget, while China and Russia are plotting new additional bases. In the near future, will peace and science, the backbone of the Antarctic Treaty, survive? To do science in Antarctica, you have to be tough and resourceful, teamwork and collaboration. But the Navy and the scientists had never met each other before, certainly never trained together. So how did that collaboration work?
Dead slow, ahead both engines.
An unprecedented voyage.
Ship's headed 2 degrees of latitude.
430. 430.
En route to Antarctica, the Canadian Navy's HMCS Margaret Brooke navigating through the southernmost tip of Chile.
This mission for the Royal Canadian Navy will be the first of any Royal Canadian naval ship to be heading as far south as we are right now. We're really spreading our wings and seeing how we can help support polar science as a whole, not just Antarctic, but Arctic science.
There's going to be like 1 or 2 extra hooks, right?
The Navy is hosting 15 research scientists from across Canada, Arctic experts who'll work to unlock climate clues from the Southern Pole, which helps regulate our climate.
It provides this polar analog to the Canadian Arctic, and it's going to let us learn about environmental changes that are occurring in Antarctica and let us compare those changes to what we observe in our own Arctic.
Planning for this expedition took months, outfitting the ship back in Halifax to carry out its mission as a research vessel.
Really, it's all about the support to science. You know, we don't have any aspect of sovereignty down in Antarctica. That's not at all our mandate here. We've done everything possible, basically short of painting the ship white and red before we left Punta Arenas, to really make sure that we're seen as wanting to be collaborative and helping to support the science piece. And we're not at all down there as a quote-unquote warship.
The Margaret Brooke started this leg of Operation Projection in Punta Arenas, Chile. Embarking the science team and getting the CBC on board as well. Settling in to document an epic voyage. For nearly everyone on board, this would be a first encounter with the White Continent at the southern end of the world.
CPA on 320.
The route to get there passes through Patagonia and its stunning archipelago at the tip of South America before the ship would traverse the Drake Passage. On the aft decks, the scientists are preparing for weeks of intense work, beginning with the launch of a giant thermometer, which will measure the Southern Ocean 24/7 for years.
This is the float that we're going to launch today. It's an Argo float. This is the antenna that it uses to talk to the satellite, and this is the instrument package in here. It measures the temperature and the salinity of the seawater.
Sophia Johannesson is with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans.
Did you have a look at the bladder when it was lying down? As soon as we let it go overboard, it will go down to 1,000 meters, and then it will float along at 1,000 meters wherever the current takes it for about 10 days. And then at the end of 10 days, it will go down further to 2,000 meters, and then it will shoot right up to the surface.
All right, in the water!
It will make contact with a GPS satellite to pinpoint its position, and then it will also send the information, the stored temperature and salinity data, up to a different satellite. It can tell us how the water is warming, and that can be used in climate models, both to help predict the short-term weather and also to give more information about future climate change and how fast the world is warming.
The first data on a month-long mission to measure how Antarctica is responding to the changing climate. We'll be back after the break with an up-close look at science on a Navy ship, and why would a Canadian Navy expedition go all the way to Antarctica anyway? At the heart of it, this journey is all about science. What can this place tell us about climate in the past and the future? Here's how the scientists tried to find out. Every day, suit up,
A little further.
load up,
Well, I've got 5 bottles, 5 glaciers.
The scientists are headed out to the glaciers, lowered in a Navy boat turned research craft, to measure what's changing in the ocean at the bottom of the world. We're going with them. Antarctica helps regulate the global climate, but sea ice is melting to near record lows. February had abnormally warm temperatures, which over time affects everything in the ocean ecology.
We've seen a ton of penguins today. Hopefully there'll be some penguin DNA in there, some whale DNA.
Jenny Tolman is capturing DNA in water samples, but her expertise is the smallest of organisms.
Microbes are the little engines of the ocean. They're also the things they respond the most quickly to change, and the poles are a very rapidly changing place.
But collecting samples can be tricky work. Tia Anderlini is studying trace metals, reaching out to scoop up seawater.
I was using a really long pole, basically to avoid contamination from the boat itself.
Woohoo! And at sea, things just happen.
Ooh, I dropped it.
A plastic lid slipped into the ocean.
Can you look over and see if there's a cap floating under the boat?
But within minutes,
retrieved.
It's been recovered. Glaciers are retreating in the Antarctic Peninsula more rapidly than before.
The depth is 51 meters.
One way to measure what's going on is grabbing sediment from the seafloor. Jeremy Bentley lets down a large claw to the depths and then hand over hand hauls it back up to deliver a muddy mass. There are clues here, and with deeper cores, about glacial history.
We're looking at changes over time,
including human imprint, like any evidence of microplastics.
It's like a Christmas day for me with a good sediment sample.
A good bit of mud.
Yes.
Most of the samples will go back to Canada to analyze and share. There's more ambition than time. It's so rare to get here. The challenge is worth it.
It's a great day for samples from glaciers from here.
You got everybody?
Here.
Day's end. It's back to the mother ship with a bit of Antarctic treasure. But their day isn't over. As night falls in Antarctica, the HMCS Margaret Brooke darkens, switching to all red light.
Slew it in.
There's still work to do.
At the waterline.
On the quarterdeck, a hive of discovery.
Yeah, let's bring it on board.
A long net pulled out of the ocean and hosed down carries small organisms, which play a vital role.
So just seeing here mostly voracious filter feeders. They eat particles, organic matter that's in the water column, and then they poop it out. So
they'll be examining these salps for contaminants.
Here, this is the solitary form.
Yeah.
The scientists are educating the Navy's top commander, Vice Admiral Angus Topshee, on oceanography.
You'll have to forgive my science as well. I was an arts major, so anything I say the Navy has taught me.
I'll stop, please.
Right, I collect the water.
Brent Else is sampling the Southern Ocean water using a CTD Lars, custom built in Canada. It plunges deep into the ocean under high pressure to capture water at different depths, here as deep as 1 kilometer.
Roger, holding.
The rosette, as it's called, comes up brimming with water.
And then we get a cap on right away.
For the average layperson, you know, water is water. So you've got a whole ocean out there. You're collecting water and you're putting it in all these different containers. Why?
Well, because water isn't just water. In an ocean like this, there's lots of different water masses. There's lots of different types of water at different levels in the ocean.
Are you on 10 too, Celine?
I mostly measure dissolved carbon dioxide, and I'm interested in how carbon dioxide moves from the atmosphere into the ocean and then moves deep down in the ocean where it is sequestered for hundreds or thousands of years.
Bottle 5 has nutrients.
It's liquid gold for these scientists. Everyone wants a bit of it for their own investigations.
We all work together, we get the rosette drained faster so we can go back in. And everybody gets to bed a little sooner.
The The cold water in the Southern Ocean around Antarctica is a huge carbon sink, absorbing a lot of the carbon dioxide emissions we put into the atmosphere. But as the sea surface warms, that could change.
As the oceans warm, as circulation patterns change, it's expected that that ocean carbon sink will slow down over time. And the polar regions are the areas where those carbon sinks are most important.
For the last 3 weeks, 15 scientists from across Canada have turned the Navy vessel into a research ship.
50 meters.
Working with a Navy crew to maneuver the boats.
Take tile off stern as well.
Operate the crane, lower the winch, and generally assist them daily to gather up samples.
The time's 19:18, and we are at 147 feet.
In this extreme environment, there's been a lot of learning.
Good to go, you have permission to launch.
This team is trying to haul up mud from the ocean floor, using what looks like a torpedo, weighted to plunge it into the seabed with force.
150.
Jeremy Bentley is on the winch.
200.
The seabed sediment will tell them a story.
Coming back in. Gonna boom up 2 feet. Okay, you can lower away head sleep. Ready?
Got it?
Yeah, got it.
It definitely looks more disturbed at the top than the other one, but we'll keep this one just in case it's the best in the end.
Sophia Johannesson will slice up the cores to analyze.
Whatever happens in the surface above, the particles sink down and they build up layers in the mud, the newer ones on top of the older ones, and we can read that history back through time and we can learn from it. It's been pretty hectic. The first day was a bit of a disaster for field work. Pretty much everything went wrong that could go wrong.
They adjusted and managed to fill a fridge full of samples. Turns out all mud doesn't look the same.
If we take this core out, for example, this is a section that's about 1.5 meters long, and so represents about probably 1,000 years of history at the bottom of the ocean.
1,000 years of sediment here.
Probably something like that. You can see that the sediment is much darker.
Alex Normando and Karen Douglas will send these samples back to Halifax to be x-rayed.
We use an X-ray, yeah. It helps to enhance areas of the core that are denser than others.
We can get a clearer pictures of the past climate change and then being able to predict what's going to happen in the next 50 to 100 years here in Antarctica.
Antarctica is a coveted lab. One of the few places in the world which has mostly escaped a heavy human footprint. Sandy Steffen and Jeff Stupple are sampling snow for what shouldn't be here. Contaminants like mercury deposits and microplastics.
They can travel long distances from source regions into remote areas like the Antarctic. So we're looking for very minuscule fiber like microplastics to see where they've come from.
Do you think they are here?
Absolutely. Mercury is a problem because once it gets into the ecosystem, it can turn into a very nasty toxic form.
They'll keep the snow frozen until it gets back to Canada for many researchers to analyze what's hidden inside.
When I talk to people about the impact of climate change on things, they just consider warming. And they consider, like the ice is melting and all this. And I said, yes, but what happens when the ice melts?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a clearance too that's closer to that iceberg on the other side.
The HMCS Margaret Brooke carried the science team well past the Antarctic Circle.
Between the two mountains, that's our channel.
Breaking ice to get through.
Okay, roger.
Revealing the powerful icy contours of Antarctica, while sailing to the most southerly point the Canadian Navy has ever been.
Port 15.
With the fieldwork paused for now.
Slow ahead, both engines.
There's time for some reflection.
One of my goals in coming here was to make the Navy fall in love with science. so that they would just want to, keep working with us and keep going on adventures with us. And we've had nothing but support, and that's great.
As Mission Antarctica continues its journey. Every big project needs a good leader. The chief scientist on this expedition is Thomas James from Natural Resources Canada.
Thank you very much. These are Canada-Chile flag pins.
We talked to him about why this mission is so critical from the volcanic sands of Deception Island. Marking their territory near the relics of a former whaling station. Abandoned, like the Chilean and British bases, which were here on Deception Island, before volcanic eruptions in the late 1960s chased them away, leaving Whalers Bay to its natural inhabitants, mostly.
What happens in Antarctica doesn't stay in Antarctica.
Tom James is the chief scientist of an all-Canadian expedition to Antarctica. He's studying sea level rise.
The Antarctic ice sheet contains enormous amounts of fresh water, and as the ice sheet thins and melts in places, calves at faster rates, that's going to affect global sea level change.
Antarctica's ancient glaciers are receding and sea ice has reached near record lows. Both contribute to rising global sea levels at an increasing rate.
The planet is changing extremely quickly, and so what we see in the Canadian Arctic is also mirrored in Antarctica. And by engaging in Antarctica, we not only learn about the other pole, as it were, but we also engage with the very large number of nations that are doing Antarctic research.
This is where they used to process all the whale blubber, one of a very few examples of a commercial settlement here on the continent. Under the Antarctic Treaty, it wouldn't be allowed today. But the island is still changing, with luxury ships bringing thousands of tourists. James is collecting samples for a fellow scientist who wants to measure how ship traffic may be impacting such a remote place.
What we're doing is adding to that body of knowledge of how are contaminants dispersing globally, how are glaciers retreating, and how is that retreat of glaciers and overall climate warming changing the environment.
100 years ago, whalers perished on this frozen island. Now data from here will help forecast our climate's next century. What you didn't see in that report was a close encounter with a seal who was pretty territorial about Whalers Bay. Oh, he's charging us at one point, he said. When we got to Deception Island, I truly had to pinch myself. I was at the bottom of the world, in a bay that's actually an active volcano. It just had this sense of mystery about it. So there we were walking along. The seals were lined up like soldiers on the beach, just protecting their territory. There were a lot of seals. And Tom James, the chief scientist, told me that sometimes these seals can get quite aggressive. Unbeknownst to us, behind us, there was this seal, and he does start charging us, like running towards us. And I don't know if you've ever seen a seal in the wild, but with their flippers, they're not exactly elegant or efficient as sprinters. However, he was coming along pretty fast, probably looked slightly ridiculous, but I think I was kind of laughing, actually. We were startled. We were startled and ran a few steps down to the beach, and he finally gave up the chase. Yeah, we had a laugh. I've been chased by humans, but never a seal. When we come back,
Welcome aboard.
the commander of the Navy arrives in Antarctica. We ask him why Canada really came here. Do you think there's a security concern here in Antarctica, as there is in the Arctic? And later,
It does look a little clogged.
breaking ice.
Until there comes to a point, then it's on me. Do we proceed, or do we kind of say, yeah, all right, this is as far south as we can go?
It's clear that Antarctica isn't immune to geopolitics. So what's Canada's role? We took that question to the commander of the Canadian Navy, who came out to visit HMCS Margaret Brooke to see the crew and see what the scientists were doing on the Navy ship. It's a rare day when the Navy's top commander travels more than 16,000 kilometers to visit one of the vessels in his fleet.
Still works pretty well.
For the first time in Antarctica. Vice Admiral Angus Topshee deployed the ship on this expedition for a dual purpose, science and security. For his arrival, an official welcome from the Navy crew. And the ship's captain, Terry Scher.
So awesome to see you.
Aboard. Welcome to Antarctica.
The Margaret Brooke has been temporarily reconfigured. Under the Antarctic Treaty, any military activity must have a research focus. So this voyage is a collaboration with 15 Canadian climate scientists.
Usually we do see at some point down in the depth here, the lines start to run straight up and down.
Topshee is getting a crash course on why Antarctica is such a critical lab to explore and how climate change is impacting the Southern Ocean.
The genesis of this was the idea of let's go get some hands-on experience. Let's do some science and just see if we can figure out things that can help us better protect and defend our own north.
Do you think there's a security concern here in Antarctica, as there is in the Arctic?
I definitely do. I am concerned that the whole agreement that we would not militarize the Arctic, that we would not exploit the resources of the Antarctic, could change. And I don't think that's in our interest to allow that to change easily.
Vice Admiral Topshee wants to see what's happening geopolitically in this remote part of the world and find out what Canada can learn from other countries operating here, like Chile, with its military-supported research base here in Maxwell Bay.
Antarctica doesn't want us here. The weather is hostile, the environment, the ground is hostile.
Yet a growing number of countries do want to increase their footprint. The Chilean base on King George Island maintains a landing strip and air support for research stations and for the growing tourism between November and March.
Roger, Marina 7092. And so on your busiest day, how many flights and how many passengers? Maybe 8 flights?
Up to 8 flights coming or going and 300 passengers a day in the Antarctic summer.
It's a good approximation to say that.
That is more than I would expect this far away.
Just in this bay, there are multiple research stations. On one side, obscured, is a Russian base with its own Orthodox church. On the other, 2 kilometers away, is a Chinese one named the Great Wall.
Central Communication Office, where we have WhatsApp to talk with the Russians, Iranians, some ways to talk with China.
All in close proximity.
And so just by the simple fact of coming down here and appreciating how closely all of these different operations are, and in the research in advance of coming down here, we realized that China is increasing their Antarctic footprint. A lot of their research is dual purpose. It obviously serves a military purpose as well as an economic and potentially a diplomatic purpose. So it's interesting to get a better sense of that.
His mission accomplished, Topshee returns to Ottawa, and the Margaret Brooke sets sail further south. Threading through towering icebergs and ice-filled channels, the most challenging navigating of this expedition. That's coming up. But first...
The speed though, Kevin? It should be fine.
This mission charted new territory for the Navy and the scientists. Lots of lessons learned, including that operations in extreme environments rarely go exactly as planned.
No one ready there, Gordon.
Contact this bridge. You have permission to launch the USV when ready, over.
Science at sea is a heart-pumping project.
Get that hook up!
With the Navy crew trying to launch Kevin Wilcox's remote-controlled boat.
Whoa! 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 Sorry about that. We were getting right underneath the transom. I didn't want anybody's head getting hit.
The unmanned surface vehicle is part of the University of New Brunswick's Ocean Mapping Group. It even has a mascot, Pingachu.
So ping like a sonar. The most important is the sonar that's underneath.
And so that essentially sends a pulse of sound down to the seafloor.
100 times a minute, creating a picture of the bottom of the sea.
So we have a map over here that has data that's been collected from other groups. So I'm essentially going to be driving the USV back and forth and essentially painting in this area of the seafloor.
As the Antarctic warms and the glaciers dump more fresh water into the salty seawater, scientists want to know what happens to ocean life. This work fits into a bigger picture. Only about 25% of the world's oceans are mapped, and there's a push on to get it all done. But as you can see, it's incremental and challenging. On shore, it may not look like much, but this connects to an undersea cable, part of an observatory which reads the ocean's vitals, temperature, pressure, and salinity every day.
And so that's was put in by Ocean Networks Canada in a collaboration with the Spanish for this location.
The Yellow Explorer is working away. The seabed map is starting to fill in, but suddenly, trouble.
Surprisingly, there's kelp here, which...
Who knew?
Yeah, exactly. And so that got caught up in my motors, essentially. And we've cleared that, but unfortunately, they're still not responding.
Attempts to fix it fail. So it's back to Mothership to triage the problem. And he still has to get his vehicle back on board the Margaret Brooke.
Okay, heads up in the boat.
USV is clear of the water.
Safely stored. Turns out it was just a fuse. He's relieved.
All the challenges, I do it all over again.
Stop both engines.
When we come back,
In between, like the bigger one off the port bow and the smaller one off the starboard bow, that's where I'm going to try to go. That makes sense.
how to thread a Navy ship through a sea of icebergs.
Slow ahead both engines.
Nighttime is always what can't you see.
Stop thruster.
And a peek behind the scenes, how we did it. The HMCS Margaret Brooke is an Arctic and offshore patrol vessel, capable of breaking through new ice up to 1 meter thick. Well, that was certainly tested as we crossed over the Antarctic Circle. Haunting age-old ice, broken off glaciers years ago, molded by seawater into the stunning architecture of the Southern Ocean. But the frozen beauty hides a menace for explorers on a Canadian Navy vessel navigating its channels, especially at night.
Okay, stop both engines. Half thrust starboard. And it's just about midway down now? Yeah. Okay. Very good.
On the bridge, Navy watchkeepers and navigators peer into the gloom, maneuvering powerful spotlights to find the tip of an iceberg.
Stop thruster. Stop thruster.
Without the spot, they're invisible, and as much as 90% of the ice lies below water. The weather's deteriorating, and the HMCS Margaret Brooke is on its final push south in Antarctica.
And whatever we can do with the center one to try to get a better picture ahead would be awesome.
Commander Terry Scher has been on the bridge much of the night.
In between, like the bigger one off the port bow and the smaller one off the starboard bow, that's where I'm going to try to go. Does that make sense?
Nighttime is always what can't you see, is really the biggest thing. Our ice radars are actually fantastic. They've been working very, very well. So that's been able to get us kind of that bubble. I'll call it the safety bubble around the ship. The more I know about what's in that bubble, the better off our team can be to help kind of remove ourselves from any risks or dangers to the ship.
By morning, the snowfall's given way to overcast skies and much more ice. A fresh shift reports to the bridge. The more eyes, the better. The plan is to sail on south, but up ahead, it appears the ice has clogged the channel.
It does look a little clogged.
Yeah.
The Margaret Brooke is designed to break through new ice up to 1 meter thick, but they don't know the depth of the ice ahead or whether there's clear water beyond.
I'm gonna let the MCR know we may need ice breaking.
Yep.
Copy. I'll bring up diesel generator number 2 and diesel generator number 4. Is it okay if I leave them at idle until we get close to the ice?
Yep.
Yeah.
As commanding officer, Terry Scher had made the call to go, but the ice can shift, and it has.
You know, it was a heightened level, absolutely. We can take all of the precautions that we can take. We can use all of the information that is provided to us, but still there comes to a point, then it's on me as the commanding officer to say yes or no. Do we proceed, or do we kind of say, yeah, all right, this is as far south as we can go. Okay, speed over the ground, please.
3.5 knots.
Roger.
They've done their checklist and decided to advance.
We're currently in ice mode as we speak right now.
Okay, fair.
Plowing the bow of the Margaret Brook into the ice sheet. It's starting to splinter, cracks opening up. The ship is passing through steadily, cautiously, with glaciers on either side and icebergs all around.
Stop thruster.
Stop thrust.
Half ahead both engines.
Half ahead, both ends.
The risk calculation is paying off. The ice moves aside as the ship carves its path.
Very good. It's all good. Yeah, it's breaking up. So I'll be honest, this is the first ice breaking that I was able to do personally. So done a lot in the simulators and everything. So that was definitely I needed to make sure that I wasn't making the decision because of me, and that I needed to trust my team who had experience ice breaking in some other opportunities. So from a career perspective, really, really cool to be able to get to do that.
For the ship's operations officer, Jeff Brooker, getting here and breaking ice was all good stress.
Pretty intense experience for everybody.
Yes. Obviously, it's unlike what we're normally doing. That's an experience that, as a watchkeeper, we need to start the proficiency within our own Navy as we start kind of venturing into being in the Arctic maybe more frequently than we have been in the past.
So everything that we did down in Antarctica, every lesson that we learned in Antarctica, we can apply to the north.
The destination was worth the effort. Rothera Bay.
Very good.
Home to a research station run by the British Antarctic Survey, a permanent base in a stunning landscape. This was as far south as the Margaret Brook would go. The ship would turn back the next day, taking an outer route in open seas to return to Chile. The month-long Antarctic expedition was nearing its end. For the Royal Canadian Navy and the science team in collaboration, it was just one long experiment.
So I really think we're coming back as a Margaret Brook family. I think one of the scientists, I heard them say that their goal was to make the RCN love science, and I can't speak for the RCN, but I can speak for our family. And absolutely, they've stolen our hearts. Really, it feels like just yesterday you and I were on the bridge, and you're asking me about, what were we going to be doing down there, and what was I excited about, and everything like that. And so I think it's gone by really quickly.
When we return, some of our favorite sights and sounds, and a peek at how we did it. Thanks for coming along on CBC in Antarctica. If there's one thing that all of us took away from here is the power of this place, and that change here will affect us everywhere. We leave you with some of our favorite sights and sounds. They are irresistible, as curious about us as we are about them. We spent more than a few moments trying to capture their quirky spirit. Seemingly the only thing that isn't changing in Antarctica. An expedition like this takes precise planning. Starting more than a year ago for the Navy, adding the science team and all their equipment, then sailing across the Antarctic Circle. CBC videographer Sam Martin, producer Jill English, and I lived on the ship for a month to bring you these stories.
This is your accommodations.
No queen-size bed?
Our make-do office was in the bow of the ship. with an audio booth in a storeroom. To follow the science meant squeezing into dry suits and then lowering into the ocean multiple times a day. For hours spent on the sea, in small boats and frigid winds, each expertly navigated by the Navy bosuns.
You all good to go?
This is Chewy, as he's known. His real name is Liam.
The wind, the rain, I mean, there are days where we had to pack it up because, you know, some of the sea states, you are taking on waves that are way too much for the boat. I can say for myself that it is an amazing experience to be a part of such scientific research.
His salute to the Royal Canadian Navy, who charted this course, assisted the scientists.
Well, that's a lot of spaghetti sauce.
And fed and watered 95 crew and civilians 3 times a day.
It's Fish Friday, so these lemons are going to be out for people who want lemons for fish.
Cool. This is our main freezer, where we keep our meats, and our dessert freezer. Oh, look at that.
The scientists answered our innumerable questions.
What you're seeing there is algae.
Patiently, to explain polar science in depth.
Have all personnel disembark from your boat, over.
Just about to touch land here in Antarctica.
Woo! Because for nearly all of us on board, this was a first expedition to the White Continent, and it left its unforgettable mark. Thank you for joining us in CBC in Antarctica.